for joining us for this episode of Inside Town Hall. I'm your host, Madeline Shields. Continued population growth creates more property managers providing housing, and any concerns or disputes can then lead to needing code enforcement. Joining me today is City Councilor Curt Soehl, and his guest is Jeff Eckhoff, the Director of Planning and Development Services for the City of Sioux Falls. Thank you both for joining us today. First off, let's talk a little bit about what is code enforcement and why do we need it?
Well, that's a great question, and that's why Director Eckhoff is here. As the summer now is coming upon us, even though we do have a little bit of snow in the forecast, I think it's a good time to talk about that code enforcement, not just for consistently applying it across the board, but what new things are going to come up. We have code enforcement for lawn care. We have code enforcement for snow removal. We also have code enforcement that deals with property management. If you're a renter, on how to deal with your landlord, on a landlord, what the rules are. So it's something that we deal with all the time in the city. I would say about 1/3 of the contacts I get from the constituents have to deal with code enforcement.
Talk a little bit about how your department manages all of these interactions with code enforcement.
Sure. As Councilor Soehl said, it's really multifaceted with the different. Some of it is seasonal with like the lawn, the grass, and the snow, and there's also aspect from the Department of Health. So if you have garbage or unsanitary conditions, they get involved with that as well. But what we're seeing is, and to Kurt's point, a lot of our calls are about buildings, rental units that are run down. And so last year we kind of reorganized our property maintenance team. We made our code enforcement guys all property maintenance inspectors, and then we had an extra FTE that we had a person leave. We repurposed it, and we kind of added another person in our property maintenance team. So now we have 5 folks. If you get a call, so if you have a question or an issue, the phone number is 978-6900, or they can go to the website or send an email, property@siouxfalls.gov, and they will get contacted that day or the next day at the latest, and oftentimes we can do inspections that same day. And so if that happens, we'll contact the property owner and we'll work with them on compliance, whatever that looks like. And maybe it's fixing a screen door or a door, maybe it's replacing a window, whatever it might be. If we need to get health involved, we'll do that as well.
Talk a little bit about what changes had to be made, like what wasn't happening before that is now being addressed.
I think the biggest thing is we have worked hard with the Department of Health in the last year to really try to coordinate our calls a lot better, because a lot of times if there's a code violation in our department, there's a good chance there's a code violation that affects their department too. So we've worked harder on the communication, working back and forth. We're trying to get to a point where some of the simple inspections we can do for each other, which would actually then make us more efficient, have more boots on the ground in a more efficient way. We've organized, now that we have the number of inspectors that we do, we've organized them by quadrants of the city. So they're more familiar with their territory and they can react a lot faster, and they spend more time in that area. So through that effort, for example, they are able to be a little more proactive. If they see something going on, they can address it earlier on before it gets to be a problem.
Let's talk a little bit about, we've had a lot of growth, and there's a lot more, different units being built, whether it's, family units or, multi-family units with apartment buildings and young people and then, places for retirees. What's your advice for people who are moving into these properties, at least at the beginning, so that it doesn't get to code enforcement?
Well, one of the things that I would tell people, if you're looking at a new place, to check out your landlord a little bit. What we've seen in Sioux Falls is we've got a large amount of apartment buildings or other rental properties that are locally owned. And sometimes the local owners seem to take a little bit more care than the national owners. Now in Sioux Falls, we're seeing a lot more national ownership of apartments and rental units. With that comes a little bit of consternation on how well they take care of it. They might not be used to the standards that we set here in the Midwest for upkeep in their buildings and for things like that. And certainly if you're not aware of what's going on in the community, if you're not here all the time, you might not understand that your properties might be slipping a little bit. So I recommend to new people, make sure you check out your landlord a little bit. We've got some great local ownership for apartments and other places like that too. And I'll have Director Eckhoff talk a little bit about some of the national owners which have caught some publicity in Sioux Falls for really not keeping up their properties.
Right. And in some cases too, the other thing to consider is as our community ages, the housing stock gets older too, and needs more repair. One of the things we've done when we have a couple of them that we have to give extra attention to keep them in compliance. And we actually hold monthly meetings with them. We have, and our property maintenance supervisor, Justin Christensen, does a good job, has an agenda, goes through properties, specifically talks about different sites, what's going on there, what he's seeing. And we've had a pretty good luck, at least opening up communication with those folks. And we've been able to reduce the number of open cases, but it's a constant something you have to stay on top of, because to Councilor Soehl's point, one, they have a lot of properties. Two, it's ownership that isn't necessarily here, and so it just takes a little extra attention sometimes on our behalf to make sure that they're doing what they need to do.
Are there any extra requirements or certifications that people have to have if they are going to own property and rent it out? I don't think it's common knowledge unless, to rent a place to folks without knowing what their rights are and what am I responsible for as the property owner. Is there any kind of class or certification that people have to be able to rent to people?
Yes.
What are some of those parameters? What do they need to know?
The specifics I'll have Director Eckhoff talk to, but we've worked through this in the last couple of years to increase our rental registry. So you're supposed to be registered if you're doing that. There's also, we put into ordinance now, there's a 2-hour class that you're supposed to have to do that, because a lot of people this is either their first time to own a rental property, or they inherit it for somebody, and they might not know what we're expecting here in Sioux Falls. It's a very small fee, $50 to have it on the rental registry, and in the past, we have suspended that to make sure everybody's through that. So the 2-hour class is put on by the rental association. We don't set it up, but it's approved, and it's a good class that people that have taken it. So that's kind of a little bit of the homework. You don't have to have that if you're a licensed real estate broker or a property manager, because we assume you've already got those credentials through that kind of training.
Has that helped, that class, do you think?
Yeah, it really has. I can't remember the last number we've had. I think we've had 5,000 or 7,000 units registered in a short time. We've had hundreds of people go through the class. It's been a great partnership with the South Dakota Multifamily Housing Association. They actually really helped us get the word out, and they're the ones that we did the first trainings in person, and then they developed the training video now that people can watch online. And then after they've watched it, they get a certificate, and then we can certify them, or register them. So if people are curious, they can call, and we can tell them whether that unit is registered or not. And if it's registered, they know that we're aware of them, we know who the ownership is, and they've gone through the training.
Was this kind of a learning curve when outside entities started buying properties in Sioux Falls to rent them out? I think it's happening all over the United States. Did it kind of happen in a short amount of time, like an influx?
Well, there was a large outside property that came in and bought a lot of units.
It's 2,000.
Yeah, they bought it. So that was the first one. It was a learning process for me to do that, to see how that would work. And not necessarily is it always the outside ones. It's the ones that don't take care of their properties. So that started some of the things that we've talked about. We've been working on improving our code enforcement or listening to the public since I've been on the council. Little tweaks here or there, and some of the things Director Eckhoff has done along with that. It goes to making our people that inspect the building codes, they're more efficient now than they used to be with technology. I mean, when I had a little bit of work done at my place, I mean, they came out without a problem, and they could take a picture. If it was an electrical guy, he could take a picture of what was going on in the water service and send it in, and they wouldn't have to have 2 or 3 different inspectors come out. So has it been a learning curve? For me, it certainly has.
How about in terms of getting the inspectors onboarded and expanding that program? And do they have really good relationships now with these rental property managers?
Yeah, our first move is to just try for compliance, and actually, in all cases, probably 90% of the time, 80% of the time, we get compliance just with a notice, letting them know that they're out of compliance. Of course, the ones that don't come back, and they're the hardest ones that you spend your time with. But that's another thing. As our staff, I think, works hard at building those relationships, knowing who those people are. We bring them in. We brought a different landlord in the other day. It owns about 100 properties in town. Sat them down, had a conversation with them about what the expectations are. And I think a lot of it was a little bit eye-opening for him as well. But now we have that contact, and they have that face-to-face, and it really, I think, makes a lot of difference as you try to strive towards getting people to comply with what the rules are.
Okay. Now there is a new chief of building official, Neil King. Let's talk a little bit about what this role is and what does Mr. King oversee?
Well, I will tell you, and Director Eckhoff get more detailed, but I will tell you from the council's viewpoint, it was Butch Warrington for all these years. And when Butch would come to the council and would say, hey, we have to make these changes. Here's the building codes. They're updated nationally, and we're going to adopt some of those. His word was gold to the city council. And now with Neil coming on, and I have talked to Butch, and he said he kind of might have retired a little early to make room so Neil could get into that position because he's earned it. So council's had limited interaction with Neil yet, but I anticipate that to go on. So as you're talking about the building codes, which are going to be updated fairly soon, it's a long process for the department. The city council, not every one of the city council members is intimate with the plumbing codes. So we really have to rely heavy on the department heads and their people to guide us through that.
We always talk about when people run for city council and they win a seat, they don't have to know everything, right?
Right.
They're here to represent the citizenry. And so now Neil King is not new to the city of Sioux Falls, correct?
No,
he was already an employee.
Right. So he was our building inspection manager.
Okay.
And then he was a building inspector before that. He's been with the city, I think, 8 years, something like that, and came out of the private sector. He was a contractor prior to that. So, and Neil's been groomed for this position. We've had him through leadership classes and different things, and he has a lot of Butch's characteristics. He's very practical. He's very a common sense approach to try to figure that out. But the chief building official actually oversees the largest part of our department because it's the people that review the plans. Our plans examiners, every house, every building, every addition has to go through a plan review to look at the plans to make sure they meet building code and fire code and all those things. And then we have our inspectors. And we have building inspectors, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. And so those are about 20 people that oversee that. Those folks do about 50,000 inspections a year.
And that's for new construction and remodeling, is that
Yes.
correct?
Yeah, anything, a deck,
and
anything,
additions.
yeah, anything it might be.
Okay.
And then there's about half a dozen different codes that we follow. And there's the International Building Code that kind of oversees the main codes. And it's interesting, the authority on that, because the legislature has to approve that every 3 years. It's a 3-year cycle. They approve that, and then it kind of flows down to the residential code, the existing building code, and then there's the mechanical code. And all of that kind of follows that main building code for continuity. The legislature 2 years ago created a law, and it was supposed to be a task force that kind of studied the code to make sure the cost wasn't too impactful. Butch, along with some other building officials, prepared all the work for them and gave it to them, and then they failed to meet, and so they had passed this law that they had to meet, and they hadn't met, And so that was deferred, so we won't be able to do the new building code because the 24 codes are in the cycle. The electrical code, the state commission, there's a state commission for electrical and plumbing, and so kind of like our health codes, they contract with us to do those inspections for them. So we follow those. So the electric commission, that board can just pass their codes, which they did. The plumbing commission has to get approval from the state legislature, and they just passed that this year as well too. So we'll follow along with that, and there's a fire code, and there's even a code for pools.
So when we're talking about codes, if the legislature's involved, and is there law for specific places like the city of Sioux Falls, or is it across the board for South Dakota?
It's across the board for South Dakota.
Are they resistant to those changes?
No, I think there's some national narrative too about the cost of regulation on housing, and that's a national narrative. I think from the state home builders, that's kind of their discussion too. And so, what they're really trying to do is balance to make sure that the balance between codes for safety issues, but also trying to make sure that it doesn't dominate costs and affect affordable housing.
Well, at this point, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll come back. We're going to talk about the role the Home Builders Association plays, and we're going to talk about affordable housing. We'll be back in just a moment.
This is Dr. Amber Groniger from Falls Community Health. I'm here today to talk to you about measles and vaccination. Cough, runny nose, red eyes. This sounds like the common cold, but could actually be the start of a measles infection. Measles is highly contagious and spreads by breathing, coughing, and sneezing. It can cause brain damage, deafness, and even death. The way that it can be prevented is by vaccination. Are you and your child vaccinated? The number of cases within the United States is increasing. Don't become one of these cases. Protect yourself and your loved ones by making sure that your vaccinations are up to date. For more information on the measles vaccine, contact your physician or Falls Community Health.
Welcome back to Inside Town Hall, where we are talking with City Councilor Curt Soehl, and his guest is Jeff Eckhoff, the Director of Planning and Development Services for the City of Sioux Falls. Let's turn to the role of the Home Builders Association of the Sioux Empire. About, what is their role in building and codes?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I will tell you from the council side, I think we have a great relationship with the home builders, and I think the whole city does too. I've been able to attend some of their events, and it was too recently they had the National Home Builders President in, and he said that Sioux Falls is kind of a unicorn in the fact that the relationship between planning and zoning and development people that work with Jeff there and the home builders is unique, because we get along very well with them. And I know the council listens to the home builders quite a bit. We're talking about updating the building codes. This comes every few years, and we listen to them a lot on what is practical, what works in South Dakota and what doesn't. So they're very influential, and we're dang glad that they're building the homes that they do here today. So we think the home builders is great, and how they work with Jeff, I'll let him talk with that. But
yeah, we've been really fortunate to have, as long as I've been here, and I think before that, a great working relationship with them, and we understand that we need each other. There's a lot of respect there, and whenever we look at changing in building codes, we always sit down with them. We kind of start with staff, and then we go to their government affairs committee, and then they go to the full board, and we walk through all the changes with them. And the building code allows us to make local amendments, and like anything that's a broad base for the whole country, there are things that don't really make sense here. And we've been fortunate with Butch and now with Neil to have that common sense to say, yeah, that, there'd be no reason for us to do that in Sioux Falls. And so we work with the home builders, and they really appreciate that we take a practical look at what makes sense here. Life safety comes first, we all agree on that, but then beyond that, how can we make it as many options for the home builders to make sure that they can operate and build homes that are still affordable for folks. And so we've been blessed with that, and we continue to work with them. The International Energy Code is an issue right now. It's a discussion point. We've worked with them on that. They're actually doing some workshops now on that to help people understand where we are. So it's just a good working relationship, and we're very, very blessed with it.
The energy code is going to be quite contentious when it comes in front of the council, and we're going to have to vote on that because the cost of construction versus sustainability is sometimes those two things don't go together. So there's a group of the public that are very vocal about we have to move to be more sustainable and more, we got to get the energy code, the most up-to-date one. And then you have the cost of construction on the other side. So politically, for the council, it's going to be a tough path to make everybody happy, and I don't think we can do that. So I think we're going to be able to make some changes and maybe update it and still keep the affordability there for our people. But there's so many other factors that are going to affordability right now that sustainability is. Councilor Bronco and I are working, we're in the very early stages of trying to find a way to incentivize people to build sustainable, to maybe, I'll call it a green home, a new home, a green home. And to do that, the only tool we really have is the city's property tax. So we're going to try and find a way. I don't know if we can do it. We're going to try and find a way that if you build a green home, we can rebate the city's portion of the property tax. So the increased price will kind of be offset. I know if you do energy efficient furnace, you might get something back from the electrical company. We're trying to work on something like that. It's in the very early stages. We'd like to get something like that put together at least by the time the budget's finalized in September.
With the International Energy Code, we are actually stuck back in 2009, and that's by the state statute, and we're looking at that, whether we can amend that in a different way. The other thing to remember about that is that's the code, but the builders in Sioux Falls aren't building the 2009 standards. Some of the materials you used in 2009, they can't even get anymore. And so they understand they have a responsibility to help educate people to where we are in the actual code, to what we're doing, what practice is versus what the policy that we're stuck with is. There's also with the 24 code for the energy code, they've backed some things off from 21 because they realized that maybe they got a little bit too heavy-handed, that added too many costs. So that's a work in progress, and the home builders are aware of it, and we're kind of working with them. We're working with Councilor Soehl, just how we move forward with that, because there's a lot of concern and questions from folks, and we need to listen to that and react accordingly.
Who is having difficulty with the new energy codes? Is it people who are building? Is it people who are modeling? Homeowners? How does that work?
One, it's a national narrative, and two, as Councilor Soehl said, we're kind of a unicorn that way. I don't believe all the jurisdictions in South Dakota have the same working relationship with their home builders that we do. And so, I've had those conversations with our local home builders staff, and they acknowledge that we're kind of unique here. And there might be another town where it's not. And I think, so that at a national level and a legislative level, that's where the disconnect is.
Okay. So when we're talking about green homes, what are we talking about? What are some of the things that people could implement in their homes?
The specifics are, the insulations, more insulation to have it, and electrical things to be more energy efficient. So energy efficiency is the biggest thing, and it has to do with the footprint of your house and how it's done, how the ventilation works. So there's a lot of different moving parts to get more energy efficient in your home. All of those things add cost. So if you're a first-time home buyer, or even a second or third-time home buyer, and you're getting into these things and you're adding $8, $10, $15, $25,000 to the purchase of a brand new house, those are the drawbacks to going sustainability. Now, over the long run, the environmental people will tell you will pay, but when you have to pay that much money up front for those things, that's the gig right there. So those are the balancing acts that we're trying to figure out.
And there's a lot of debate too about the payback on that. Some will say it takes 20 years, some say you get it back in 5 years. And the thing that I think a new homeowner has to think about too is, if that payoff shoe is, let's say it's 12 years, am I going to be in that home 12 years? And so it is like Curt had mentioned, it is kind of a numbers game and calculating if as we say, is the juice worth the squeeze.
Well, I can give a testimonial. We put in new windows in our home that's 30 years old, and our heat bill went down by $100 a month. Yeah, just last fall to this winter, so it was incredible.
Any place where air can leak in,
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Okay, we just have a couple minutes left. Let's talk about affordable housing. There's some things that the city has been doing for affordable housing. Would you like to start off with, workforce housing? What are we seeing right now?
Well, right now, certainly affordable housing's always been an issue since I've been on the council the last 7 years. And we've I just had the city staff, and Logan Penfield helped a lot for us to put some numbers together. And Jody Moss, our city council finance person, we spent well over $50 million to subsidize the contractors and builders to get affordable housing. Now, it's all levels in that for affordable housing. So that's been in the last 7 years that we've done that. And we think that's still a big thing to make sure people can have a home if they want to have a home or they have a place to stay. So it's all levels. And that is usually initiated by the contractor and the builder that will come to the city and say, I want to make this project go, but I'm going to need some help. Now, there was some federal funds. We hope that there will be federal funds going forward, that they were conduit through the city. Jeff and his team are the ones that make sure it's administered correctly. But we put a lot of people in affordable housing in the last few years.
You want to talk a little bit about some of the things that are going on right now?
Yeah, so all the projects that we work with are aimed at 80% and below. Most of them are in that 70 to 60% and below. A few years back, was it 3 years ago, I think the council put it, recognized the need for the deep discounts, the 30%, 30 to 50% AMI. It put some money, $4 million that we put in with some of our other housing funds that we have. And we've been able to do some projects like that. One of them is the Community Commons, which is where we took 10 units at the old Children's Inn when they moved and made them into a little bit larger apartments. And then there's room for 10 families from the Bishop Dudley to get them out, if they have children, to get them in a different situation. It's got a playground, it's got a space for the kids to study, it's got a kitchen. I mean, it's really a much better setting. We did a program called the Empower Campus. There was 2 sixplex units on 2nd Avenue, about 2 blocks south of Lions Park. And they were run down. We worked with our partners in ICAP. They've completely remodeled those in their Bright Futures, which are typically single mothers with kids. They're going through that program. This is their first place to live, and so it's a kind of transitional housing for them. But that is the lowest income folks that we have, and they're in there with vouchers and other support that we've been able to provide. So those are a couple projects. The Veterans Community Project, the city put a lot of money into that up front with the property and the road. And then the other thing I would say about workforce housing is we're working with a couple different providers on larger units with 4% tax credit. So that'll be probably in that 60, 70%. So young professionals starting their jobs, young people, it's an affordable apartment for them.
Okay. Well, and we're always talking about housing, so this will not be the last conversation. Thank you both for being here today. If you'd like to know more of what's going on in the city of Sioux Falls, you can go to siouxfalls.gov. We'll see you next month.